Welcome to the sports podcast that will put you in the zone all the time. Welcome to Pack Sports Zone with me, your host, Peter Pacman Clarke. What's going on, guys? We're here for another episode of Pack Sports Zone and a very full football episode, as in 2 days that we got the kickoff of the season with the Dallas Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So today I'll be going through an interview with Darren Urban. He's covered the Arizona Cardinals for over 20 years. And I'll also be going over my pick for every game this week, as well as the playoff picks and Super Bowl picks and all that stuff. So we got a lot of stuff to get into today, and it's going to be a very full show. Special day after Labor Day edition of Pack Sports Zone. So without further ado, let's get right into the interview with Darren Urban. Like I said, he's been covering the Arizona Cardinals for over 20 years. So let's just get right into that. Let me get him right on the line. And now I'm very happy to be having Darren Urban on. He's covered the Arizona Cardinals for at least 22 seasons now. Darren, welcome to the show. Welcome to Pack Sports Zone.
Appreciate you having me.
Now, I just want to start this off. Obviously, we'll get into the Cardinals and how's camp going and everything like that. But I want to talk about Larry Fitzgerald. Just give a comment on how much has he meant to this franchise?
I mean, it's almost tough to quantify that, to be honest. This is a guy who, assuming he is done, played 17 years for this organization, meant obviously a ton on the field. I mean, he's one of the best receivers ever. He's going to go into the Hall of Fame. They basically rode his back to the Super Bowl back in 2008 when he had, I think, arguably the best postseason for a player ever. But it's what he's done beyond that. It's the impact he's had on the field, off the field, in terms of how much the fans love him. What he's done in the community, especially kind of behind the scenes. I mean, he's a guy that he would do charity stuff, but it usually wasn't in front of the cameras. He'd kind of quietly show up at a hospital or things like that. And just the fact that he handled himself in such a professional way in so many areas that, he was one of those guys that parents wanted to point to and say, it's the antithesis of the Charles Barkley, I'm not a role model. I think Larry saw himself as a role model, and I think that really showed when it comes to the fans and how much they love him.
Yeah, it's amazing coming all the way from being just a sideline ball boy at the Minnesota Vikings all the way to one of the greatest wide receivers in history.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that, I mean, look, Larry was supremely talented as an athlete and still is in a lot of ways. But, at some point it was going to come to an end. Obviously, he's talked about not really having the urge to play anymore. And that's obviously one of the first things that you got to kind of look at as a player. If you don't feel strongly about playing, especially in the NFL when you're getting beat up the way you are, that's when it's time to say, okay, I'm hanging it up. And obviously he hasn't officially said that, but he's about as close as he can at this point.
Yeah. Now, moving on to this current team, current players right now, obviously we'll start with Kyler Murray. He came in, obviously, number one pick, started from year one and went through all that. Then in year two, he avoided the sophomore slump that a lot of young QBs go through. Now he's about to start year three. What are some of the expectations for him now?
Well, I mean, look, when you have a guy that you see as a franchise quarterback, you're expecting him to be the franchise quarterback. And with that means constant improvement. And, he did, like you mentioned, he was an offensive rookie of the year. In his first year, he made the Pro Bowl last year. He was good. But they want him to be great. They need him to be great. And I don't think he's great yet. And so that's what the expectations are, is that he continues to make moves in that direction. Now, does he get all the way there this year? We'll see what happens. But if he can continue to improve on the arc that he's already on, you got to feel good if you're the Cardinals.
And his backfield mate, when you look at, they went out there and got James Conner, and Chase Edmonds had a great year last year. How is that playing out right now? Is there anybody that has to lead in that competition?
No, I mean, I think Chase Edmonds is a guy who's already been on the team, and I think they like him. And a lot of areas as a starter. It's probably a situation where I could see James Conner ending up with more actual rushing attempts by the time the season's over, but I could see Chase Edmonds with more touches because he is going to be the one who they're going to target more as a pass catcher. But James Conner can do that too, and I think they like the combination of the two, and I think they like the idea of having a bigger back in certain situations, which they didn't. Kenyon Drake could do some of those things last year, but I think they like having a little bit more beef with James Conner, and hopefully that will aid them in some short yardage situations that they had trouble with in 2020.
Now, they've never been a team to really utilize the tight end too much, even back when they had Arians there. Now they have so much talent at wide receiver. You talk about bringing in A.J. Green with the top gun, obviously, DeAndre Hopkins. And they have Isabella that they drafted. They had Christian Kirk, that was a second-round pick. You have all these numerous wide receivers that are so talented. Do you expect them to go more four wide, run and shoot type offense? How do you think they're going to deploy all these guys?
Well, I think it's an evolution of a process. I don't know if they're necessarily going to go four wide all the time, although they did use 10 personnel more often than anybody else last year, and I don't think that'll necessarily change. We're still only talking a quarter of the time. They'll have some tight ends out there. I definitely think they'll use the three wide receiver set. They've got Rondale Moore, their second-round pick this year, who I think is going to play a big role, especially in certain situations. I think your top three guys are Hopkins and Green and Kirk, and I think it'll just depend on kind of how things play out. I think one of the big stories for this team is we talk about the improvement of Kyler Murray. It's going to be the evolution of Cliff Kingsbury as an offensive mind and as a play caller, and do things continue to change for him. And, I think it's Cliff Kingsbury has acknowledged it himself. Chase Edmonds talked about early in camp. I think defenses were able to kind of get a bead on what the Cardinals were going to do the second half of the season. I think that's one of the reasons they struggled as they came down the stretch. And I think how that's handled as we go forward is a big deal. So getting back to your original question, whether that means more four wide or less four wide, I'm not really sure. I think they definitely got the pieces to use more of it, but is it going to be something that benefits this team? And I think they've got to figure that out.
Yeah, I think right now, as you look at their team and you can use Kyler Murray's athleticism by spreading it out, I think having the four wides that they used so much last year, I think benefited them a lot.
I think that's possible. Again, some of it last year was the skill positions and having a Rondale Moore and bringing in an A.J. Green who hopefully is healthy and stays healthy. I do think it helps. We talked about Larry Fitzgerald earlier, but he was playing slot for them, and that he's not the ideal slot guy at this point in his career. I think Christian Kirk can flourish there if he plays there. And again, if A.J. Green can take some of the pressure off DeAndre Hopkins, you have to like how that kind of plays out for the Cardinals.
Well, in your opinion right now, what is the biggest question on offense and on defense?
I think the biggest question on offense right now, to me, is ultimately going to be, can they find that intermediate passing game that I think was missing last year and is a piece to Kyler Murray that I think needs to improve? They've got the outside game. They can throw it to the sidelines. I think Kyler Murray has a good deep ball. And they clearly have the horizontal passing game with some short screens and that kind of thing, which is kind of a staple of what Cliff Kingsbury likes to run. But is that intermediate game there? Is the seam passing there? Is the between the hash, maybe not between the hash marks, but definitely between the yard markers? Is that there so that defenses can't just completely concentrate on the sidelines or down the field? And I think that's something that was missing last year, and that's something I think they need to get better at. On defense, I think there's a couple different areas. Now that Malcolm Butler is talking about retirement, are they deep enough at cornerback? And before the Malcolm Butler thing, they have two very young inside linebackers in Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons, and I think they're going to play a ton. And the question is, can they play without making so many young mistakes that it really hurts this defense? And I think that's something to watch.
And you mentioned Malcolm Butler and possibly retiring. Has there been any update? Has he given any update regarding his decision on that?
Well, he's on the reserve retired list now. I don't think it's a given that he's never coming back, but that's certainly the direction they're going in right now. I mean, the problem Malcolm Butler has is if he walks away, he's walking away for more than $3 million, and that's a pretty hefty thing to walk away from. Now, we don't know exactly why. I can say that it's not about vaccinations. I know that for a fact, and I'm hoping it's more football related than necessarily a bad personal thing related. But whether he comes back or not, they're prepared at this point that he wouldn't be back, and if he does, it just gives them another body back there to help.
Now, just comment on one other thing that you mentioned just now. Typically, most teams, they run nickel defense. They have their own base coverage, but most teams run nickel most of the time now in today's NFL. In that situation, most of the time you have one of your inside linebackers come off. But you have two great dynamic inside linebackers with Collins and with Simmons. How are they going to work that? Is Simmons going to play mostly the slot in that situation, or how is that going to work?
I think that's going to be depending on who they play every week and how they want to kind of attack. If they have health, they feel good about the top three cornerbacks they have, and Byron Murphy and Robert Alford, and they're really high on Marco Wilson, a fourth-round pick out of Florida, who has looked really good in training camp and probably better than they expected. So you have an opportunity with three cornerbacks there. Or and if you decide to play those three guys, then you're in a situation where, like, okay, why don't we could potentially put Isaiah Simmons as a outside linebacker in that position, or as a big safety. So you have some options there. If they decide that they want to play Simmons in the slot, then you can go with the two corners, and you probably go at this point with Murphy, and I'm not sure Alford's still on the COVID list, but do you go with Wilson? You don't go with Alford? I don't know, but I think Simmons gives you a lot of options there if you want Simmons to be the slot guy and then have a true outside pass rusher type like Marcus Golden to go with Chandler Jones, or if you want to put J.J. Watt on the outside for a play with Chandler Jones and bring in a different defensive lineman. I think they've got a lot of options at this point in terms of what they want to do in obvious passing situations.
And you mentioned how much that Isaiah Simmons does in this defense, and he's all over the field, and that's kind of what he was drafted to do. Has he taken over as like the quarterback of that defense?
Well, right now, I know Isaiah wants to have a big role in that, but Zaven Collins is playing the mic right now.
Really?
Their number one pick from this year, and he's the one calling the plays. He's the one that's kind of taking over for Jordan Hicks. And in terms of the quarterback of the defense, that'll be his role. It won't be Isaiah Simmons.
Okay. Any other people that have stood out in your eye through camp so far?
I think you have you've had a couple people that have shown. I mean, I think DeAndre Hopkins, even though he doesn't practice necessarily every day, he's DeAndre Hopkins. I think he's looked good. A couple of down the roster kind of guys. On Antoine Wesley, who's on the roster right now, and I don't know how much he's going to play, but he's kind of a fringe wide receiver who's, I thought, did pretty well, all things considered, once they went through. And I mentioned Marco Wilson, the rookie cornerback, who I thought has played really well. Byron Murphy, the cornerback, has played really well. So those are the kind of guys that have stuck out for me. Eno Benjamin, the third/fourth running back, I think has had a pretty decent camp. But I don't know how much he'll actually get to play with Connor and Edmonds in the backfield.
Cool. Now, the most important thing now is, what is your prediction for the record? Do you think they're ready to make a playoff spot this year?
Well, I got to be honest. When people ask me about a record, I never necessarily come straight out. I mean, I think they have a range. First of all, you always have to assume health, because if there's a bunch of injuries, then all bets are off the table. But I see this team as, if they play the way they're capable of playing, and if Kyler Murray takes the steps forward, I see this team being able to win 10 or 11 games. I really do. Now, if he doesn't, if they struggle, especially offensively like they did down the stretch, this team might only win 8 games. And obviously in this day and age, that's under 500. So I think they're in the most difficult division in the NFL. I think there's probably going to be picked by most people to be the fourth place team in that division. So I think there's some hurdles to get over, but I do think this team has the talent to make some noise if they can come together. They have to prove they can come together.
Well, everybody out there, you can go on Twitter and see Darren Herbert on Twitter. That's Cards Chatter. Darren, thank you for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll be able to have you back on the show during the season.
I appreciate you having me.
All right. Thanks, Darren.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, thank you to Darren Irvin for showing up on the show, Pat Sports Zone, and giving us some insight on the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals are going to be a very interesting team this year because they have so much firepower on offense. They do have some good players on defense, but it's all about putting it together right now. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they put it together and how that team progresses as the year starts. But speaking of the year starting, it's time to give picks for the week. We got 16 games to go over, so we got to go over them pretty quick. Starting off with Thursday night, 8:20 p.m., kicking off the season with the Dallas Cowboys at defending Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think this game will all depend on how Dak. Now, first of all, I'm going to pick Tampa Bay to win, but I think the game flow in terms of it being close is going to depend on how Dak compares to the Tampa Bay defense. I think the Buccaneers are going to be able to score on Dallas. I don't think they got much better on defense, so I think they'll be able to score 30 points easily. Dallas normally can score 30 points on most teams, but Tampa Bay has a really good defense. They have a top 3 defense, in my opinion. So it'll be and plus, obviously, this is his first game that he's playing coming back from the injury. You had the shoulder MRI that caused that controversy in the preseason. You had the ankle injury from last year. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out and see, if the Cowboys offense looks as good as they do on paper, because on paper they look really good. Their line is above average, obviously. You have obviously Zeke Elliott in the backfield, and you have 3 very dynamic wide receivers. So it's going to be very fun game to watch. It's a good game to kick off the season, but I got Tampa Bay winning that first game. Moving on to the Sunday schedule when all the other teams play except for one game. Jacksonville Jaguars and the Houston Texans. Now, this may be the game where Jacksonville can actually win. Jacksonville only won one game last year. However, the game that they won was the game that I actually picked them to win, the opening season. The one thing you'll realize about most of these picks is that maybe a couple of them maybe surprise you, but you almost got to throw that in for week one, because week one is always the weird week in the NFL. It's always always the game where you'll see a big upset, teams start to when fans start to overreact. And then by week 2, week 3, everything drops back to normal. But Texans, I think, are one of the worst teams in the league this year. They're going to be starting Taylor instead of Deshaun Watson. It looks like he's just going to be a healthy scratch for the rest of the year until his legal problems are worked out. So I got the Jaguars winning. I think Trevor Lawrence wins this first game. They have some good offensive weapons. It's just about how much their defense could play, but their defense doesn't have to play that great against the Texans offense that isn't good right now. So I got the Jaguars winning their opening game against Texans. Next game, the Los Angeles Chargers versus the Washington football team. I am actually very high on both of these teams. I'll get to my playoff picks later, but I think both of these teams will actually make the playoffs in their conferences. I'm going to give the advantage to Washington right now just because I think their defense is better. They're playing at home, and I'm really high on Antonio Gibson. I think he's somebody that they're really going to use, similar to how Carolina Panthers used Christian McCaffrey this year. So I think he's in for a big year this year. But I got Washington winning that game. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks at the Indianapolis Colts. This game could go either way. I think Seattle is a team that can be a Super Bowl contender. I don't think the Colts are there yet. Also, you got Carson Wentz in his first game regular season game with them. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a transition period going on there. I do love Jonathan Taylor. I think he has a chance to have a big game, but I think Seattle wins this game on the road. They don't do great coming east, but obviously they've had the whole offseason to prepare for this one. So I think they'll be more prepared than they normally are coming towards east. So I got the Seahawks beating the Colts in Indianapolis. New York Jets and Carolina Panthers, the Sam Darnold Bowl, as Sam Darnold plays against his former team, the New York Jets, the team that pretty much gave up on him. even though they gave no protection and not much great wide receivers. And they seem to be doing it with this year with Zach Wilson, as they have Corey Davis that they went and signed. They went out there and got Elijah Moore. You still got Denzel Mims last year. You got Jamison Crowder there, so he has numerous weapons. They're trying to work on the offensive line, and that's the most important thing, because Sam Darnold just got killed on that team. While on the other side, you got the Carolina Panthers. You got later on this week, you'll hear me speak with Antoine Staley, who covers the Carolina Panthers. We'll talk a little bit more about them on that show. But Panthers are going through a transition period right now. It's almost like you don't know if they're going to take a step forward or step back. We'll be able to see a lot from week 1. I think Darnold gets his revenge on the Jets in week 1, because I just don't see Zach Wilson being, first of all, I was never that high on Zach Wilson, but even if you do like Zach Wilson, it's his first game. He's on the road against a good team with Burns, who's a good pass rusher. It's going to be very tough for him to show out on his first game. So I got Carolina winning that game against the Jets. Moving on. Minnesota Vikings against the Cincinnati Bengals. I love Joe Burrow. I'll say that. And I think that even though he had the preseason issues, Jamar Chase will be a very good wide receiver. Vikings, as you know, I'm not a Kirk Cousins fan, but I think their team is better. You got Dalvin Cook in the backfield. You got Thielen and Jefferson on the outside. I think that even though Irv Smith out, I still think that they'll be able to utilize the tight end position. It's just overall, and their defense obviously is much better. So I think Minnesota wins this game, but I really do think that Cincinnati is starting to look better. If Joe Burrow is healthy, I think that team they got to get some offensive line help. I know that Chase was the first round pick last year, and they wanted to get him in there with his college teammate Joe Burrow, but they definitely need to get some offensive line help. And once they get their offensive line out, that offense can really start moving the ball, and maybe Joe Mixon will actually be able to get more than 2 yards per carry. But moving on to the next game, the Arizona Cardinals, as we just talked with Darren Urban earlier, facing my Tennessee Titans. I think this will be, like I said, it's going to be a very interesting game because Arizona has a lot of offense. Titans didn't show much on defense last year, but they're very different with 6 new starters on defense. I think the Titans right now are looking towards Super Bowl contention. Cardinals are looking towards playoff contention. So I think they're in different leagues right now. At first week, you never know what can happen. As I said, you can see Kyler Murray go off and have 4 touchdowns and they win the game on a last-minute field goal or something like that. But I'm going to go with the Titans. If they're serious about being a Super Bowl contender, they need to beat teams like the Arizona Cardinals. So I'm going to go with the Tennessee Titans to win that game. Up next, the San Francisco 49ers versus the Detroit Lions. If the Houston Texans aren't the worst team in the league, the Detroit Lions are. So I just don't think they have much in them. DeAndre Swift is good. TJ Hawkinson is good. And that's pretty much about it. Everybody else, you're going to have to wait for another year or two to see if they get their real starting quarterback, get some more options on defense, but get their offensive line better. The line isn't too terrible, but they need to get that better. But they're just a real bad team right now. Tyrell Williams is their number 1 wide receiver, and that's really saying a lot right there. So I got the 49ers winning that game in Detroit. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Buffalo Bills. This could be one of the games of the week, along with a game I'll mention a little bit later, but I think the Bills are going to win this game. Steelers are always tough, especially early in the year. Big Ben's arm is usually much better earlier in the year before it starts to wear down. So this could be a very good game, but I just think Buffalo's combination of offense and defense, they got some confidence from winning division last year, and they are also a Super Bowl contender, as I think they are legit top 3 team in the AFC, top 5 team in football. So I think the Buffalo Bills will find a way to protect home field advantage and beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. Next up, another Pennsylvania team, as the Philadelphia Eagles are the Atlanta Falcons. Falcons are in a weird situation right now because they have solid players, but they don't have players to contend. Matt Ryan, solid quarterback, not really a Super Bowl quarterback in my opinion at this point. Mike Davis has been solid everywhere he played, whether Carolina or in college. He's always been a good, solid running back. That's their starting running back right now. Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts, I expect to be just loaded on targets this year, as those are the main 2 weapons for the Atlanta Falcons. On the other side, the Eagles is all about Jalen Hurts. It depends on how he's going to do. as the full-time starter. They have a lot of speed on the outside. Jalen Reagor's fast. Obviously, Smith is faster. They drafted this year in the first round. They have a lot of speed on the outside. And you got two really good tight ends in Goddard and in Ertz. So Miles Sanders in the backfield. Their offense should be fine, especially if their line can play up to what they should. Their problem is going to be defense. They need to make sure that their defense is able to, before they turn into the Dallas Cowboys, that their defense can actually do something. I do think that they'll have enough to beat the have enough to beat the Falcons in Atlanta. It's weird that I'm picking a lot of road teams this week. It's like I said, one is week one, so you haven't defined that home field advantage. And most of the home field teams will get off to good starts, but then once it sets in, I think the better teams are on the road this week. Next matchup, 4:00 games. I think this one is also probably going to be one of the games of the week. Cleveland Browns at the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, how you beat Kansas City is you got to be able to run the ball and you got to be able to play your safeties back to make sure that Kansas City runs the ball. Cleveland already can do that. You know they're going to have, by the time the year is done, between Kareem Hunt, between Nick Chubb, you're going to have almost 450 carries between the two of them. They're going to run the ball down their throats. That's how you beat Kansas City, even if it's in Kansas City. The question is, can their defense slow Kansas City down? Can their safeties play back? Can they keep people in front of them? Can they keep Tyreek Hill? Can they keep Hardman in front of them instead of letting them get behind the defense? If they can, the Cleveland Browns will win this game. So most people are going to pick Kansas City to win this game, but I think the matchup prefers towards the Cleveland Browns, and I'm actually going to go with the Cleveland Browns to upset them in week one. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers at New Orleans Saints. There's two more teams that I think are probably the top 3-4 teams in the NFC. Even though that the Saints have Jameis Winston starting now without Drew Brees, I think Winston actually helps their deep ball better. I think his arm was better. His decisions obviously aren't, but we'll see if Sean Payton can curve that a little bit, because if Sean Payton can, instead of having him be 30 interceptions, even if he can cut it down to 15, 20, that'll be a big improvement because he does have a great arm. He's going to throw for 30 plus touchdowns. So Winston's very underrated, especially in fantasy leagues. On the other side of the ball, Green Bay's coming back fully intact. They added some defensive players to go with their offense. Their offense, you have Aaron Rodgers. Once you have Aaron Rodgers, you got Aaron Jones, you got Devontae Adams, you got Robert Tonyan, you got all those guys on offense. You don't really have to worry about that too much. It's more about defense, and that's what they tried to acquire in the offseason. It looks like it's going to be Aaron Rodgers last year with the Green Bay Packers. I expect them to go to probably Denver next year. But we'll see what happens with that. But I do think that week one, they find a way to go into New Orleans and win that game, because New Orleans will not be playing at home, as their games have been shifted because of the issue with the Hurricane Ida. So Green Bay to win that game at New Orleans. Moving on to the other 4:00 game, the Denver Broncos at the New York Giants. Now, I think the Broncos are going to be who we think they are. They're going to be a team that will try to run the ball, have their quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater, be a game manager and just pretty much play defense. And they have a lot of people that can get to the quarterback. And if they get out to a lead or keep it close, their defense can win them this game. If the Giants get out and are up 10-0, 14-0, or 14-3, then it can start to snowball a little bit, as we saw that happen with Denver, as they don't get pass rush when the other team doesn't have to pass the ball. So it's all about getting out to an early lead. Whoever gets out to the early lead in this game is going to be the team that wins this game, in my opinion. So with that said, I'm going to say the Giants actually get out to an early start. They take that 14-3 or 14-6 lead, and I think they are the ones that find a way to win this game in opening week. Last 4:00 game, the Miami Dolphins at the New England Patriots. It's always a good rivalry every time these two play. Most of the time it's a good game. Right now you're going to have two Alabama quarterbacks at the helm, as for one side, Mac Jones, the rookie quarterback for New England, and you're going to have Tua Tagovailoa, or however you want to say it, because you're getting notes about that on Twitter. But Tua versus Mac should be a good game. I think Tua is going to do a lot better than people think he will. Mac is a solid quarterback, has a solid arm. He's very dependent on his line because he doesn't move. He reminds me a little bit of Drew Bledsoe. that he's going to be a bit of a statue back there. So he's really dependent on how his line does for him. But I think his line will do good enough that they'll find a way to be good this year. I think they can be above 500 team this year. I also think the Dolphins will be around over 500 also. So I think this is probably one of the closest games of the week and one of the toughest games of the week for me one of the toughest games of the week for me to pick. I'm actually going to go with New England. I would not be surprised if Miami won this game also though. I'm picking New England to win. I would not bet it because I think it's going to be too close, can go either way. I'm not sure what the spreads are at right now because I haven't looked at it, but if there's anything more than 3, take the underdog if you're going to bet it. Next game, the Chicago Bears at the Rams. I think the Rams are a team that are close to, I think they actually will be a playoff team. I think the Bears are close to being a playoff team, but they're starting Andy Dalton, and I don't know why. I think they should be starting Justin Fields. I think Fields is the guy who's going to be their future. I think he's ready. I think he's outperformed Dalton in the preseason, and I think they should unleash him. And they're not. And I think holding him back for however many weeks they're going to hold him back till, I think is what's going to stop them and prevent them from making a playoff run. So I'm going to go with the Rams to start that off with their 1-0 start. Their new offense with Matt Stafford, throwing to obviously Robert Woods, Van Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee. You got a lot of weapons on that Rams offense. And obviously you got some big stars on defense also with Donald Ramsey and all those guys. So I got the Rams at home winning their opening game on Sunday Night Football. Moving on to the Monday night game, the Baltimore Ravens versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Finally, for the first time, the Raiders will have home fans in Las Vegas. Should be a huge event. That's the reason why they put it on Monday night. It's in prime time. So I personally, I'm surprised this year they don't have the double prime time game for Monday night, because that's usually pretty fun when they do that. Having a 7 o'clock game and then having a 10 o'clock game. But they're not doing that this year. Just the one game with Baltimore and Raiders. I think Baltimore is going to win this game, even though the energy will be completely on the Raiders side because of their first home game in this new stadium with fans and everything. But I just think that to cancel out crowd noise, to cancel out momentum of the home energy, you need to be able to run the ball, and that's pretty much Baltimore's calling card. They're going to run the ball. It's going to be Lamar running at you. It's going to be Gus Johnson running at you. It's going to be everybody's just going to try to pound the ball at you. And their defense now, their defense is not as good as it used to be. I think they were 25th last year in overall defense or sacks, and they just weren't the normal Baltimore defense, and they didn't change too much. But I think their offense is enough that it just it sucks the air out of a stadium. So I gotta say that I think that overall when it's done, I think that the Baltimore Ravens will go into Las Vegas, win the first game there, and then we'll see what happens from there. We'll see if because I think the Ravens are a little bit overrated. I still don't trust Lamar Jackson to throw the ball. I still think that he's a running back playing quarterback. And on the other side, I don't trust Carr. That's another place that if they decide to move on from him, I can see Aaron Rodgers going to play there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it goes for these two teams. I do think the Ravens will make the playoffs, but speaking of that, I'll get right into that. As playoff picks for this year, I want to just first go by the division winners. In the NFC East, I got the Washington football team. In the NFC North, I got the Green Bay Packers. In the NFC South, I got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And in the NFC West, I have the LA Rams winning the Western Division. 3 teams that I think that will make the playoffs as wild card spots in the NFC. The Seattle Seahawks, I think they obviously with Russell Wilson, they find a way to make the playoffs. They're always a tough out. The Dallas Cowboys. Now, this could cut down. Usually I pick the Cowboys to win the division. I'm not going that far this year, but I do think that their offense is good enough to find a way to get into the playoffs, especially when you look at some of the other teams in the conference. And then lastly, I mentioned him earlier, I think Jameis will be much better than he has been under the tutelage of Sean Payton. And I think the New Orleans Saints will be that 7th team to make the playoffs. Moving on to the AFC. AFC East, I got the Buffalo Bills. AFC North, I got the Cleveland Browns winning their first division in I don't even remember how long. I know that they put up a stat in the past, 15 years or so like that. The Titans had one more AFC North conference more AFC North titles in the division than the Cleveland Browns had, so have won none in that time period. But I do think that their team is ready. I do think that they're a legit, really good team. I think they have the type of team that can beat a Kansas City, which is why I picked them this week, to go on the road and find a way to win a game by rushing it down their throat, playing good defense. I do think they'll be a little bit disappointed in Jadeveon Clowney if they think he's going to come in there and be a stud and get 8-10 sacks. But we do already know that Myles Garrett on the other side is a stud, a bona fide stud, and that they can play a lot of smash mouth football. So I got Cleveland winning the NFC North. And then AFC North. And then the AFC South got the Tennessee Titans. I don't think they have much of a challenge in the division. Colts are the only team that can even compete, and I don't think they're on the same level. And then obviously out west, I got the team that defending AFC champions, the KFC. Wow. The KC Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs. And for the wild cards from that AFC, I got the Baltimore Ravens, Indianapolis Colts, and the LA Chargers. So I got two teams from LA both making the playoffs. That's going to be interesting. If we got the Rams and the Chargers both making it, and it's going to be fun to see football out west. And I mean, a lot of people were Raiders fans out there, and now that they're gone, you still got 49ers fans, but it's not the same. You still got people that still die silver and black. So are they going to be now Las Vegas Raiders fans? Are they going to be Chargers fans? Are they going to be San Fran fans? It's out west, because of the amount of teams out there, it's always weird. I've been out there, and it's always weird during football season because there's so many different teams that they root for. You don't really get a sense of just one team that everybody is going for. But with that said, those are my division winners. Those are my playoff teams. And with that said, it's time to get to the playoff picks. In the NFC Championship game, I have the Green Bay Packers versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a rematch. I think Tampa Bay got a little bit lucky because they did it on their own. First half, the Scotty Miller touchdown at the end of the half completely deflated Green Bay. And then obviously their coach, Matt LaFleur, did not go for it on fourth down, which made no sense with 2 minutes to go to try to tie up the game it was just stupid in my opinion. And he got killed for it. I don't know if that was part of Rodgers' idea of saying that he can't stay there, but it would be if it was me. But I do think that they will have a rematch. I think, and I'll get to who I think will win that in a second. But in the AFC Championship game, I do not have the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that the Chiefs are a good team that I don't think can do it for 3 years in a row. I think they obviously will make the playoffs. I think they'll win the division, but I don't think that they're going to be able to. 2 years ago, when they won the championship, they got very, very lucky. They were down in every playoff game. They were down 24 points in their first playoff game. They were down with 6 minutes to go, down 2 scores in the Super Bowl, and they found a way to win. I just don't. In my opinion, they got lucky that year. Now, last year, I think that they've got some breaks. I thought that Buffalo should have beaten them. I thought that if the Titans had moved past Baltimore, I thought they had a good matchup to beat them with Derrick Henry. You got to be able to run the ball against the team, and there's a lot of teams now out in the AFC that can run the ball. We know Baltimore can. We know Tennessee can. We know Buffalo can. These are all teams that run the ball, and that's not a good sign for Kansas City, a team that I don't think is great against the run. And even though they did find a way to stop Henry when they played him a couple years ago, that was an inexperienced Tennessee team. They were a 9-17, first time they had ever gone that far. Now you got more teams in there with playoff experience. Tennessee has, Buffalo has, Cleveland has, Baltimore has. These guys are now teams that will be in the playoffs 2-3 years in a row. And they have that experience that they won't be nervous against a Kansas City team. I don't think people are afraid of Kansas City as they were like 2-3 years ago. So I don't think Kansas City is going to the Super Bowl. It's going to the AFC Championship game. I think it'll be the Buffalo Bills versus the Tennessee Titans. Buffalo and Tennessee, I thought, were the two best teams last year. And obviously things happened. Buffalo just couldn't get by Kansas City. We saw with Tennessee, they were able to get beat up earlier by Baltimore. But I think this year, I think those two teams end up meeting in the AFC Championship game. And with that said, now for the Super Bowl, I have not a rematch, but I have two familiar foes as they met and they practiced together in the preseason a couple weeks ago. I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Tennessee Titans. I think that these are two teams. I think Tennessee's defense will be much better, but Dupree will be able to get the pass rush that Jadeveon Clowney wasn't able to get. And obviously, you now have pass rush up the middle with Danico Autry, and you didn't have that Daquan Jones. He didn't play as well as he normally does. I think one thing about the Tennessee defense that people didn't really realize, and if you listen to my interview with Jim Wyatt, he also agreed with me, is that the defense was much different when Jayon Brown got hurt. He is their best coverage linebacker. When he plays, he can cover. He's very good on third down, knocking passes down, and when people try to get those 3rd and 4s, 3rd and 5s, and get quick first downs off of them, he's very good at stopping that. And without him there, one, the Titans were completely, utterly horrible on third down. And two, their defense went from about average to horrible. And I think with him back there now, that him alone makes it at least an average defense. Then you throw in Bud Dupree replacing Jadeveon Clowney. And I think, all right, now you're talking about it being, okay, maybe solid defense. And then they completely revamped their secondary. I like Kenny Vaccaro, but he is getting up there in age. So they replaced her with Amani Hooker. You have obviously a couple rookies back there, defensive backs. You got Jack Rabbit. Christian Fulton comes back from injury. He was hurt last year. Their second-year player now. They have a lot of changes in that defense, and I think it'll be completely different than what you saw previously. While on the other side of the ball, Tampa Bay, there's really not much you got to say about them. They're defending champions. They brought back everybody. They want to make a second run at it. So I think that Green Bay does have a chance to beat them, but I just don't see Green Bay. It's the coaching. It pretty much comes down to coaching. When teams are very close and it comes down to a play or two at the end of the game, it's all about the coaching. And I don't trust Matt LaFleur with coaching my team in a Super Bowl or AFC Championship game with under 5 minutes to go. And he proved that with his decision last year. And that's not something I'm saying after a set fact. If you pay attention to my social media, I've been very hard on LaFleur before, even from the day he got hired with Green Bay. I didn't think he was a good coach, and he's proven it more and more. So I just, if a close game between Green Bay and Tampa Bay happens, I'm going to give the advantage to Tampa Bay. One, because Brady's great in close games, and two, I trust Arians over LaFleur. While on the other side, I'm going to give the slight edge to Tennessee over Buffalo, even though I'm not as high on Buffalo coach. And I think the big thing is Mike Vrabel, I think, is a top 5 coach in the league. And even if you look at the playoff game last year against the Baltimore Ravens, they lost. They played great defense, and it's because he pretty much had a great scheme for that defense. But when it comes down to it, Tampa Bay versus Tennessee, I have the Tennessee Titans winning the Super Bowl. I think they're completely built for it. I think that the defense only has to play average or slightly above average for them to win, because how do you really stop that offense? The biggest problem with the Kansas City Chiefs last year against Tampa Bay was they didn't want to run the ball. They double-teamed Kels. They double-teamed Tyreek Hill. And they said, pretty much, we're going to single team these other guys, and you got to run the ball to beat us. And Tampa Bay didn't want to do that. You can't do that with the Tennessee Titans because they want to run the ball. If you try to double team Julio Jones and double team AJ Brown, you're going to have Derrick Henry run for 200 yards, and they just don't care about that. So when it comes down to it, their offense is more flexible and more versatile than Kansas City's defense was. And I expect that, with a defense that I expect to be around average or a little bit above average, to be the deciding factor. And the Tennessee Titans will be my Super Bowl champions. Now, you could take that as being a little bit of homer. So you could say Tampa Bay, Buffalo, or any of those other teams. But I truly do think it, and I did put my money where my mouth is, as I bet them when they were 35-1. And we'll see what happens. But I think the Tennessee Titans will win the Super Bowl this year, and we're going to have a great NFL season starting in 2 days. You'll have another packed Sports Zone later on this week with a couple more guests. But I'm your host, Peter Pacman Clarke, and we will catch you a little bit later this week. Peace out, guys.